In this video, we're going to watch British politician Jacob Rees-Mogg debate climate activist for Just Stop Oil, Phoebe Plummer. You guys will remember this pink-haired maniac as one of the two perpetrators of the super attack on Vincent van Gogh's Sunflower. And guys, this interview highlights a much more deeper and fundamental problem with the religion of progressivism. And I'm going to shine a light on that during this video. So with that, let's get into the clips.
I'm really delighted to be joined by Just Stop Oil spokesman Phoebe Plummer. Thank you for coming in, because I know you don't agree with me. How do you square the circle that people want to be more prosperous, they want to lead comfortable lives, but you're saying it's absolutely urgent we stop emissions now? How do you make the two work?
Hi, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me on. As you say, I'm Phoebe. I'm 21 and I'm a student from London and a supporter of Just Stop Oil. And I wonder why you think it's incompatible to help people with the cost of living crisis and to switch to renewables, which are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. Can you name me one of your viewers who is suffering the consequences of the cost of living crisis, who doesn't want their energy bills to be 9 times cheaper right now?
Well, unfortunately, that's not what's happening, because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and you need to have fossil fuel backup to make up the gap. About half our energy every day is still coming from natural gas. Where's that going to come from?
Well, why aren't we implementing renewable technology? The largest solar farm in the UK was built in 6 weeks.
But it's not
it takes up to 28 years for any oil to come out of the ground in the North Sea.
But it's not going to produce any energy at night. That's the problem with renewables, is that they don't provide the base load that you need.
We already have the capacity to provide so much of our energy from renewables without any technology needed for storage solutions.
Notice how she just deflects every single one of his questions and his facts by using cheap rhetorical tricks like answering questions with questions and using basic logical fallacies like appeals to emotion and arguments from authority about all these experts. And she does this throughout the interview. And to say that renewables are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels and other energy sources is just one of the most idiotic things you could possibly say. And I'm not going to get into it right now, but the data worldwide show that moves towards renewable energy make energy a lot more expensive, i.e. California, Germany, and other places. And wind and solar only provides electricity, which is a fraction of what we use energy for. It doesn't take into account transport, for example. And saying it's cheaper is just partial cost accounting. They're only looking at the costs of actual solar panels and wind turbines. They're not looking at any of the back-end infrastructure. These unreliable forms of electricity, which is what they are because sometimes the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, they rely solely on reliable forms of electricity. And if you want to talk about the experts and the international agencies, the International Energy Agency also said that the intense support for renewables for the past 2 decades has hiked the energy provided from renewables from 13 or 14% to 15.7%. If all governments deliver on their current climate policies, the world will derive no more than 28% by 2015 and 100% by 2207. 200 years away. Imagine if in that 200 years we instead focused on enriching the world and encouraging entrepreneurship and ingenuity and high-level problem solving in these nations. Imagine how quickly and efficiently we could solve global issues, as we already had been doing before the cough. If you want to learn more about that, then at the end of this video, I'll put the recommended video as one that I did about Jordan Peterson's new plan with his ARC movement.
But where is this coming from? Because when the wind doesn't blow, when we had really cold days, we were reliant on importing from the EU, on coal and on gas. How are we going to replace that in the short term?
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist. What I am doing is listening to what all the experts are saying. We're living in this insane world where the experts aren't being listened to. The United Nations has called for no more oil and gas. The International Energy Agency has said we can have no new oil and gas. The IPCC report, the largest global report on the climate crisis, have all said we can have no new oil and gas. How many more experts need to say it?
Because we can't do it tomorrow. What are we going to do in terms of transport? That we still need petrol for cars and we need diesel for lorries. How are we going to get goods into supermarkets without this?
Quite frankly, I'm not a scientist. What I'm doing is I'm looking at the world and we're living the effects of the climate crisis today. Right now, people are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
But energy...
And it's preventable. We have the solutions.
Cheap energy is one of the things that has hugely extended life expectancy by the ability to control temperatures, whether this is by air conditioning or by heating, the ability to store food more effectively, the ability to transport food, and indeed use fertilisers to grow more food, has all been essential in increasing life expectancy. Taking all that away would be disastrous for life expectancy.
Do you know what's essential in keeping our food supply? Tackling the climate crisis. This year we lost 1/3 of our wheat crops, half of our potato crops, and it's only going to get worse. We're heading to a future where people are going to be fighting over the last loaves of bread at Lidl.
But the only way we get our wheat crop is by putting the fertilisers on that come from fossil fuels. How are we going to replace that? That the productivity of organic farming is so much lower than of modern farming methods. We cannot feed the world on organic farming, and you must know that.
How do you expect to feed the world when our crops are destroyed by droughts, floods, wildfires, storms?
You've always had weather events that have affected crops, but that actually using fossil fuels for fertilisers and moving on to genetic modification of crops has enormously increased the yield. That since Malthus rate, we've increased agricultural productivity by about 2% per annum. And this is what is allowing people to get extended life expectancy because they've got more certainty of food. And this all depends on cheap energy, which has come from fossil fuels.
Jacob, you have 6 children? Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war. Suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
I think you've taken the evidence for an evolving climate and then applied it in an extraordinarily extreme way and are forgetting about the enormous advantages.
I can't believe you're talking to me about an evolving climate.
Well, the climate is...
People are dying.
But this is a statement...
Do you know how many people are suffering around the world?
The appeals to emotion here are just hideous. He's just explained to you that your policies are the one set to cause famine and energy insecurity, but clearly you just had your idiotic response planned out regardless of what he said. She thinks, which is typical of an activist, that if she gets really mad and just keeps saying
people are dying,
then it gives her more credibility. Have a look at the decrease in climate-related deaths over the past 100 years. This is something that has been decreasing rapidly and continues to do so. And as Bjorn Lomborg says, climate-related disasters killed ever fewer in 2022, 97.6 less than a century ago. Richer and more resilient societies reduce disaster and deaths and swamp any potential climate signal. Why is this not reported? Instead, media only delivers climate doom. Why don't they report it? Because that depends on advancements in technology and economic growth, which depends on cheap energy. The crops that you're so desperately worried about can't be grown without fossil fuels, and more specifically ammonia, which is a derivative of natural gas. And side note, she's like a billboard for fossil fuels with her hair dye and her necklaces and bracelets and earrings and fancy clothes that she's wearing. But this interview highlights something more disturbing and fundamental. And it's that these are the kinds of people that our institutions and our universities are producing en masse. What could possibly be happening at these institutions where these people who are going there to supposedly be educated are not coming out of these institutions with a greater understanding of history and philosophy and geopolitics and the arts, but rather they're coming out as activists, as foot soldiers, as brainwashed ideologues that worship at the altar of progressivism. Here are some photos of young Phoebe living it up at university, in between, of course, her stints as guerrilla warfare leader, engaging in such brave and courageous acts as throwing soup at paintings. Which is obviously the equivalent to marching through the jungles of Congo or Cuba or fighting in rebel armies against Gaddafi. And actually, a few months ago, she and her other fanatic friend went on the PBD podcast and were asked this brilliant question by Adam Sosnick.
Legitimately, what pronouns do you identify with?
So I use they, she, he pronouns, whatever you're in the mood for.
I also go by they, them pronouns. I also don't see how that comes into this argument, because this is what we're facing. This climate crisis goes beyond anything to do with gender or sexuality.
Uses she, them, he pronouns, or whatever you're in the mood for.
Whatever you're in the mood for.
Whatever the hell that means. Coincidence? I don't think so. Not only is she completely blinded and brainwashed by the notion that the world is about to end and by the quasi-religious prophecy that the great flood is about to come and wipe out all the sinners, all of those who have trespassed against Mother Nature, but she's also been infected by the mind virus of gender ideology. Unsurprisingly. And if that wasn't enough, then Katie Hopkins followed it up with the left-right good night.
Let me ask you another question, Phoebe. Let me ask you, what bills do you currently pay? Who pays for your accommodation at university?
My student loan.
When have you ever paid any bills in your lifetime?
No.
So you don't know what it's like to be a homeowner and not to be able to afford your energy bills, and then see some stupid young people throwing soup over a painting in a gallery that has nothing to do with the fact they can't afford to pay their bills. You don't know what it's like to pay a bill, Phoebe, do you?
No, but I have empathy for those people.
I would rather that you and your friends stopped wreaking havoc in the city of London. I'd rather you stop throwing soup over paintings, stop putting orange paint on the windows of Harrods, stop sitting in roads so that my friend couldn't get the treatment that she needed. And I'd rather you went out, worked a bit. Maybe you could do some litter picking on a beach. Maybe you could do something that was practical and helpful. But I don't think being obtrusive and obstructive and lecturing ordinary people when you have no idea what it's like to try and work and make ends meet in the UK. You talk about millions of people. You talk about people who are in poverty. You have no idea what that's like because you live in the rarefied atmosphere of a university at some wokerati place, and you think what you're doing is changing the planet. I think what you're doing is pissing people off, and I think you could allocate your energies more effectively by going out and picking up litter on a beach.
What evidence is there that this is because we're using fossil fuels, that the climate evolves, but more people die each year from cold than from heat?
Have you read the IPCC report? What do you mean? What science?
But in terms, you're making extreme claims, but you're suggesting by not using fossil fuels, we would not produce the food we need to feed the world population.
I'm suggesting that if we keep on heading down this genocidal path of mass destruction, then no, there won't be any foods in the supermarket. Then we will see vast swathes of the world uninhabitable. We will see mass displacement of people.
But if you took out fossil fuels tomorrow, you would simply not have the productivity of agriculture you need to feed 8 or 9 billion people. And that would be tomorrow. And I'm not saying you shouldn't reduce emissions. I'm not arguing that. I'm simply saying you must do it when you have the technology to replace the energy that you're using. Because otherwise, all the consequences you're arguing for will happen immediately. We will simply not have the food we need to feed the population of the world.
Jacob, you know we're not asking for the taps to be turned off tomorrow. All of you know that. We're asking for an end to all new fossil fuel licenses, in line with what climate scientists around the world are saying.
But if you turn it off for new licenses now, you're requiring a change that is going to happen before we have the technology in place to substitute for it. So you may be delaying it by a few years, but this has to be a rational process to do it once you've got the technology sorted out, and we haven't got the technology yet.
So I understand you're an economics man. Yes. So
well, I'm interested in economics.
Yeah. So I've done some maths for you. I hope you don't mind. I looked up your net worth online. It's quite easy to find.
It's not actually true. It's easy to find, but it's not actually true.
In the hundreds of millions.
But that's not.
It costs around £20,000 to insulate a British home. So that's 8,000 British homes for your 150 net million, which is what it says online.
Which is untrue. But
do you really think that you're worth more than 8,000 cold, freezing families?
So he's a rich man, meaning that he doesn't care. And furthermore, we should get all of his wealth and we should redistribute it. Sounding familiar? The most sinister thing about this movement that makes me sick to my stomach when I hear it is that they blame the suffering of the global south on climate change. It's grossly dishonest and sinister almost to the point of evil, because what they are preaching is the elimination of fossil fuels and the elimination of cheap energy. That will and already is destroying the progress of developing nations, all of the progress that they were making. And then when the numbers come in about all of the people that are dying and starving and impoverished in these famine-stricken countries, they'll blame it on climate change and weather events. Take South Africa, for example. The US sent them $8 billion to move away from burning coal and towards renewable energy. This is basically a deal. They're being paid to move towards unreliable energy sources, a detrimental move for a country already struggling with energy shortages, and they're one of the richer countries in Africa. Last year, the World Bank actually indicated that 222 million people were already experiencing the threat of starvation or food insecurities. This is a number that's definitely underestimated as well and would have vastly grown since then.
You've seen the studies on insulation. That insulation.
Do you care about the people living in fuel poverty?
Very much so. When I was Secretary of State for Energy, I was responsible for developing the plan that has brought energy prices down for families. That was policy that I was intimately involved in designing, so of course I care about that.
So you do understand the report that you're asking me about says that the cost of insulating British homes is so expensive because of the government's failure to insulate British homes.
But what happens 3 years after people have insulated their homes? They use the same amount of energy as they did before. There's been a study on this, which I'm sure you've seen reports on. In the first year, they save money. In the second year, they save a small amount of money. In the third year, they have actually made themselves warmer because the economics of it is they have a certain amount they can spend on energy.
What happens when the government fails to insulate British homes? 7.5 million British people live in fuel poverty. Parents are starving themselves so that they can feed their children, and people are freezing to death in their homes because they are forced to choose between heating and eating. People are dying. Are you hearing me?
Because it's simply not true. The government introduced a cap on energy prices and support for families who couldn't afford energy prices, that those were brought in last year, and they are very significant supports.
What do you mean it's not true? Have you spoken to an ordinary person who is suffering the cost of living crisis right now?
I don't believe there's any such thing as ordinary people. I believe everybody is in their individual way quite remarkable. I think ordinary people is the most condescending way of referring to our fellow British citizens.
Well, of course you don't relate to the ordinary people. You're a millionaire.
The figures, my personal circumstances, are nothing to do with whether we impoverish people by making energy prices higher. And you want to make them higher, and I don't. But what I'd say to you finally is, why don't you stand for election? Why do you think it is right to throw soup over a picture rather than standing election and seeing if you can get people to vote for your view of the world?
You're an educated man, Jacob. You know that this is how successful movements of social change happen. They must cause disruption. And Antonio Gutierrez, he's the Secretary General of the United Nations. He has said that we are on a highway to climate hell. He has said that licensing new fossil fuels is economic and moral madness. The Secretary General of the United Nations is calling for an end to all new fossil fuels. What makes you think that I have time to get into power and make these changes?
So you want to be a dictator? You don't want voters to decide.
That's absolutely not what I said, and you know that.
Why don't you stand for election? Put yourself forward and see if people want your way.
Because we don't have time. Because if I want to have a future, if I want to have a future where I can feed myself, where I can love my family,
we're not going to feed them. We're not going to feed them without fossil fuels, which are the essential fertilizer.
Jacob Rees-Mogg pointed out a crucial aspect to this movement there. These movements, they are authoritarian to the core. They don't believe that these world-altering, life-changing, famine-causing policies should be brought about democracy. No. It's too important. Children are dying, you see. And it's just the same with the Alphabet movement she also claims to be a member of or to be a representative of. They will stop at nothing to burn down this system that they so despise. They will mobilize the most desperate, vulnerable, mentally unstable, and malleable people in society that are looking for a purpose in life to their movement. Make no mistakes, these things are all intertwined, and this is a Marxist movement against the capitalist West. Just like the communists of the past, they have seized the institutions, the educational institutions, and they have created ideological foot soldiers in the process. Students that will go out and use political violence and authoritarianism to destroy the customs of old, in the name, of course, of the utopian vision, just as Chairman Mao did with his Red Guard. And, just like the communists of old, they are willing to sacrifice as many millions as it takes. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you want to join the Rattlesnake TV community, then hit that link pinned in the top of the comments for my free, uncensored, unfiltered weekly news show where I say all the stuff I can't say on YouTube. And if you'd like to watch another video, click right here. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.